in the context of the renewed tripartite license agreement. We'll go through some frequently asked questions about the sublicense process. We'll go through the approval process itself, and then, as I said, we've got lots of time for questions. So moving along, again, just to give that context, so just a reminder that the current tripartite license expires in December. And so you've probably been getting a lot of reminders from both EFCL and from your NRCs to make sure that you are in a state to sign the renewed tripartite license, which will come into effect on January 1st. As I mentioned, I was part of a renewal working group with the EFCL for over the past 2 years, where we work together to really, open up the tripartite and try to make it a much more open, transparent, and hopefully user-friendly document. At the end of the day, it is still a legal agreement. It is a buy-in for a land use contractual document, but we're hoping that we really will succeed in continuing to make it a much better document for leagues. The amending agreement was part of that renewal process. And the amending agreement was for the current tripartite license. So again, we've heard from a couple leagues where there's a little bit of confusion in whether or not they need to sign the renewed agreement because they've signed the amending agreement this year. And yes, the amending agreement allowed for commercial use of sites for up until the end of this year. So all of those changes that we made for the amending agreement are now rolled into the new renewed agreement. But it is important that even if your league signed the amending agreement, you also need to sign the new renewed agreement. Okay, so where does sublicense fit into this? So as I said there, the renewed tripartite agreement was approved by EFCL at a special general meeting back in August, and we've been contacting leagues pretty much since September to now get into the place for signing the renewed agreement. And according to the tripartite, a sublicense must be approved by the city in advance. And that created some issues for both the city and for leagues in that we don't have the resource capacity to approve every single sublicense agreement, nor do we really want to. And so it's important that we created this process to help us find a way to make it easy for leagues to get that approval when they need it, but also find a way when perhaps we can encourage you to use a template that then avoids us needing to look at the agreement in advance. We still want to see every sublicense agreement that comes to league, and then because it helps us to paint a really great picture of all of the amazing programming that is happening across the city of Edmonton in community leagues. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. And just a reminder there that there are over 140 leagues with licensed site across the city. So it is quite a big group to really manage this process. Okay, so moving on. So how are neighborhood services and EFCL continuing to work together? So neighborhood services is the main city liaison with the EFCL on behalf of the City of Edmonton, and we work very closely together. As you will know, there's the role of the Neighborhood Resource Coordinator, also in this document, in the tripartite document known as your City Liaison, and they provide a touch point for every neighborhood and community league within the city. They help to provide that communication and support and that navigation of city processes. Within this process of the sublicense process, the EMCL have been working really closely to providing sort of the governance and board support, as well as templates that are required for this process. And I'll just introduce Paul again a little bit to talk about his role.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So like I said, I'm with Development Services, which include the 3 groups that you're going to talk to during this process, most likely at some point. Just want to start out by saying, this is new to all of us. It's a new process. We're all learning together. So if you do have questions, ask them, and we're here to work together. But in general, the 3 groups that you're going to need to work with at some point would be development permits. They deal with the Edmonton zoning bylaw and provincial acts in interpreting those, and their principal concern is going to be impact and how to mitigate that, and if it's appropriate development for an area. That's true of all cases, including yours. There's also building permits, which deal with the Alberta and Canada Building Code. And principally, they're concerned about, if a building is safe and safe for the type of occupancy that you're looking at. And then business licenses. And so the business license may be required for different groups, and it confirms that they have the permissions to operate. It acts as a vehicle for inspections of different sorts, like fire rescue services if it's needed, and enforcement if necessary. Um, yeah, I think that's a good start off, and I'll pass it back to Shireen.
Okay, so we're going to jump right in. So this is a section that I called frequently asked questions. And so, what is a sublicense? So, sublicense is any license agreement entered into between the league and a third party individual organization for the use of space for the purposes of recreation on or within the licensed site and which is subject to the terms of the conditions of the tripartite license agreement. So, you might have noticed that that sounds a lot like how it's written in the tripartite, and actually, that is how it's written in the tripartite. There's also a section specifically to within the tripartite, section 13.1, and it talks about. It also says that the league is permitted to grant a sublicense provided that three things. The purpose of the proposed sublicense is for recreation. The purpose of the proposed sublicense is not contrary to the objectives of the league. So that means it would be within something that a league would normally do or deliver for its members and residents within the neighborhoods, and that the league has consulted with their designated city liaison and followed the community league sublicense approval process. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So the next question that we have is, what is recreation? So in that previous slide, we talked about the purpose must be for recreation. And so recreation in the tripartite has been defined as the experience that results in freely chosen participation in um, physical, social, cultural, intellectual, creative, and spiritual pursuits that enhance individual and community well-being. So this is actually the Pathways to Wellbeing 2015 definition that was created nationally, and we feel that it's a good definition of recreation because it's very broad, and it will hopefully allow leagues a really wide range to provide and to also allow through sublicense process the widest range of recreational activities and pursuits. So that's why we updated that as part of the amending agreement, and then of course rolled it into this renewed agreement. Okay, so the next piece is, what is a sublicensee? So pretty straightforward there. The sublicensee means a third party or individual which has entered into a sublicense for the purpose of using space on or within the community league license site for the purposes of recreation on a regular and continuous basis. So this regular and continuous basis starts to raise some questions a lot of the time. The third party can be both for profit and not for profit. And just a reminder that the Community League license site is the site in the Schedule A map of your tripartite. So it can include both the interior space, the halls, any built structures or amenities, but also the open parkland that is the envelope of your within your boundary of your license site. So that's something else to bear in mind. Sometimes people think about a sublicense as just within a building, but it actually can be anywhere on the site, indoor or outdoor. Okay, and so the next thing, oops, oh dear, goodness, a touchy mouse today, apologize. What is the difference between a rental agreement and a sublicense? So again, within the tripartite, there are two types of agreements that a league can have. One is a rental agreement and one is a sublicense. It doesn't contemplate any other types of agreements. So for example, there's no allowance for long-term rentals within the tripartite. This type of use would require a sublicense agreement, okay? So a rental agreement between a community league and a third party occurs when recreation use is one-time, short-term, 30 days or less, and is not continuous or irregular. So those would be like events. You rent out an agreement, you have a rental agreement with a third party to host, or an individual to host an event. It might be like an event over 2 or 3 weekends. that would be okay because again, that definition of 30 days is 30 calendar days. Um, Beyond that, it becomes a sublicense agreement. So the sublicense is required when the recreation use is intended to be more than one time long term, more than 30 days, and is regular or continuous. So one of the questions that we're frequently asked here, well, what if I only rent out my hall once a quarter, but I do that every quarter for like forever, for 5 years or more. Well, then that would become a regular and continuous, right? It's something that's built into your plan or your calendar for you league, then it should become a sublicense, even though it's not that frequent. That's the way to think about it. And then rentals, also sometimes rentals will become a sublicense. If it's something that you start off, well, let's just try it. Sometimes we do a taster or a pilot of something. Let's do this for 2 weeks and see how it goes. And then it's super successful. Then you could move from a rental agreement into a sublicense agreement. Okay, so I'm sure we can come back to more questions on that if we need to. The next piece is, are there templates available that leagues can use? And the answer is yes. We have created, well, with EFCL support, and EFCL really have led on this, which is fantastic, two types of agreements and templates. So one is proceed without approval. And actually, we're changing that name. I didn't catch it in this one, so I apologize to um, proceed using template. So what we'll do is if the template is used and it's on the side of the sheet that we'll look at in a moment, the sublicense tip sheet, it may proceed without approval from the city in advance. So it will not require submission of a sublicense template in advance. Now, there's a few pieces on that are important. It must be a not-for-profit, and no changes or significant changes or edits are made other than completing the template. So if you needed to add a clause, take out a clause, change one of the clauses within that, the city would still want to receive the sublicense package for approval in advance. And then requires approval. That's where if the template we have templates that will always require approval because of the nature of the type of the use. And we'll talk again a little bit about that when we get into the process. And as I mentioned earlier there, all sublicense agreements with for-profit entities must be approved by the city in advance. So it would be a really great time if you could put the sublicense tip sheet into the chat if it's not been added already. And that will, we can refer to that for a moment now. So basically, there are at the bottom of the sublicense tip sheet that's on the EFCL website. There are two types of templates. One is proceed using template, and there are three different templates available currently. The first one is sport or activity use template. The second is sport or activity instruction template. And the third is uniformed groups. And by uniformed groups, we mean guiding, scouts, cadets, all those, a lot of the traditional groups that would have a relationship with a community league. And then on the side of requiring approval, or what we're now calling submit sublicense package, there are three different templates available currently. One is a general template, and that's in place for all those sort of odd different types of recreation that maybe we haven't considered yet. And so that's there. You can use that to basically customize whatever recreation use you have. The second one under there is a childcare template. And childcare, the city would like to see for approval because it is an external licensed process, obviously by the province, but there's also potential implications for building building and development services to have a look at that. And then the last one there on the submit sublicense is the spiritual recreation template. So we are absolutely committed to developing more templates. In fact, within the pipeline, we are looking to create a template for support groups as well as for arts and crafts type activities. And so those will be coming very soon. Um, If a league, just a note here, if a league chooses to use its own template, that's absolutely okay. Many leagues may already have templates for what they probably called long-term rentals in the past that are going to look very similar to sublicense template. What I would say to leagues with those is to have a look at the templates that now exist. Make sure you're not missing anything, because what EFCL have done is check these templates with both their insurers and their lawyers to make sure that they include things really to protect you as a league. The clauses are there intentionally to make sure that they provide the best language that they can. So as I mentioned there, all not-for-profit commercial sublicenses must be on the approved vendor list, and they also will require approval in advance. Um, this may not, this may also apply to some not-for-profit sublicensees. It just depends again on the type of use, which is again why it's a good thing for these to come through the city process. The league must provide the city with a copy of all sublicenses when signed, which I mentioned earlier. We'll also do a random check of some license agreements to ensure that EFCLs on the side of proceed without approval or proceed with using the template are being used correctly. And again, that's not really for an oversight. It's more of a protection for the leagues to make sure that all your bases are covered. And then all sublicense agreements may be shared internally with city work areas and with the FCL to make sure that you're getting the support that you need. Okay, so on the next slide. So how does the league know which sublicense template that they should use? So basically, leagues should consult with the proposed sublicense arrangements with their NRC. Have a chat with your NRC. They'll be able to help. Leagues should also choose a template that best matches the type of recreation use. It's really, again, that's why we've started to create these categories. And again, if it doesn't fit into those categories, there's that general template that's available to use. Okay, so what may not be allowed? Whoops, is our next slide. So really, very important here, the intent is to approve the sublicense. In most cases, there will not be a reason why the city would not approve a sublicense, but it might be that there's a reason, whether maybe it isn't a recreation use, that's going to be a big one, or there might be reasons that it just doesn't feel like it's a good fit for the league. And that again is for the league to decide, but we may also, want to have a look at the type of recreation use. So one example that I always give is where the definition wouldn't meet recreation use would be a dental office. So even though there may be a real need within a community to have a new dental office and wants to locate itself within a community league because maybe it's a great central location, it has parking, etc. Dentistry would not be considered a recreation use. And I believe it wouldn't be allowed to be zoned either under zoning bylaw. And so it's really the board's responsibility to ensure that the sublicense agreement is sufficient for the league's purposes and to consider that use of recreation. When the city receives the sublicense package that we'll talk about in a minute, and reviews it, circulates it through a process, it doesn't constitute legal advice from the city. It's really just making sure that it doesn't contravene the conditions of the tripartite and that it meets any other city conditions. So it's important here that city and leagues and the EFCL work well together. So Laura, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit here about this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've touched on a lot of it here, Shireen, but I mean, I think the intention, as Shireen said, is to work with the league as best we can to find ways to make things work, right? We're really looking forward to leagues exploring different opportunities that, again, fall within that definition of recreation. We want to support as much connection with local businesses, connection with local folks to offer things. But, there are some rules that we're, as we go along here, just sort of figuring out, and specifically around zoning.
Yeah.
We do have the zoning bylaw renewal that's coming up, and so things might still shift. And so we definitely commit to walking alongside leagues as those shifts happen. So this is the process today. In a year, there might be some adjustments that need to be made. And so we just sort of really want to ensure that people know that we'll have lots of open communication, lots of chances to talk about this as we move through. So.
And as we've mentioned earlier, we really want leagues to be in the driving seat here, determining what your league should be doing, and also what would be a constituted recreation use. And we are going to be very open to having those conversations and discussions with you as we learn more about the different types of opportunities that might be able to come forward now, especially now that commercial use has been included within the tripartite. Of course, it is strongly recommended that the league engage your own independent legal advice to draft and review any contractual or legal agreements. Um, I should mention too that if the city has any concerns regarding the sublicensee, the league may receive a notice and not the sublicensee, because our relationship, because of the tripartite, is with the league, not with the sublicensee. The agreement that you're going to have with the sublicensee is going to be between the league and that third party. We are not part of that sublicense agreement. And very much the league is responsible for that relationship and maintaining that. So again, just that reminder though, if you do have any questions, you can always reach out to your NRC. They will often reach out to myself, but that's really how we're learning right now. Paul, did you have anything to add to this before we move on?
No, I think you covered it off really well. I'd just add for your zoning thing, in the case of a dental office, it would be something called a health service in the zoning bylaw, which typically is not listed under the zones that a community league would operate. So you were right in that
Okay.
comment.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so now we are going to hop right into the actual approval process. And so the first part of the process is determining if a sublicense must be approved by the city in advance. The second part is preparing and submitting a sublicense package to the city for approval. So that's when it's determined that the city must approve it in advance. The part C, then the third part, is after sublicense approval has been received in principle, how does the league and the sublicensee go about meeting any conditions that may have been set? And the last part is part D, after sublicense has been approved and there's no conditions or conditions have already been met. So it is possible that you don't need to do all four steps of this process. If, for example, you determine that the sublicense can proceed by using the template, it wouldn't receive city approval. You would jump directly to part D. We do want to create a flow chart for this process, and that is in process. We just haven't had a chance to get that completed yet. But in time, we will definitely have a flow chart that will explain that. But hopefully, by explaining this process now going forward, it will make a little bit more sense as well. So part A is really that community league reaching out to the NRC for support about the new sublicense idea or opportunity. You will reach out and ask any questions that you might have. They can also help you find any resource documents that you might need. And from that, the league will choose the best template that they need to use for their sublicense agreement. And that'll be from that tip sheet that's been shared into the chat. So that's where we begin. The second stage of part A is really to look at whether or not the sublicense must be approved by the city in advance. So these are the basic tenets of that. First of all, is the third party a for-profit entity? If it is, yes, you must put together a sublicense package and submit that to the city. Is the template used by the city on the submit sublicense package list? If it is, it also needs to be submitted to the city. If the template is on the proceed using template list, but is altered or edited, or you remove clauses, then it, other than just completing the template, then it also must be submitted. And then of course, the last one is there, as I mentioned earlier, is if the lead chooses to use their own template. So moving forward then. So now we're into part B. And so with part B, we are assuming that you've answered yes to one of those 4 previous things. So perhaps you've decided to use your own template. So the sublicense package then, you will start to put together. Again, your NRC can support you with that. And what you will need to do is prepare these 3 things. So a cover letter. We'll have we have a template available for that, and it's linked into the sublicense approval process document. Hopefully that's been shared in the chat. If not, we'll make sure that's been shared out. So a cover letter will include, and you're encouraged to use the template of the cover letter, because it must contain the location of where the sublicensee will provide their service or program, contact information about the sublicensee, the proposed recreation use, whether or not it is for profit or not for profit, a business license number if it's applicable and you have that information, and the term of the agreement. So how long the agreement for the sublicense will be. The second bullet point there is the draft sublicense agreement. So that would be using your own league's template or the template that requires approval. And it must also contain a map of the area that the sublicensee will be using. So that could be a map of the entire site if you're going to be giving access to the entire site. It could be a floor plan if they're using part of your building, which again, I know EFCL were able to provide support over the summer with students to start to create some of those floor plans. Or it could also be like a rough diagram showing the space that will be used. And then the last piece there is copy of the league's board minutes, approving the league's intention to enter into the sublicense. And the reason that we want that is, again, to demonstrate that the whole league board is aware of this legal agreement and that they're in approval of signing into it. That's just to help make sure that there isn't 1 or 2 people within your board really keen to do something and the rest of the board, perhaps don't. We want that full league support. Okay, so then moving on to the second part of part B. So how do you do this? So you've put those 3 pieces together. You have your cover letter, your draft agreement, and your board approval. Together, you'll submit that to this email address. We've created a new email address, clsublicense@edmonton.ca. You'll send it to that and you'll CC in your NRC. What happens next is that the package is reviewed by Neighborhood Services and is circulated to these areas: business licenses, building permits, development permits, contract management, and city vending. And so I'll just hand over to Paul just to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely, I have to unmute myself to talk. Yeah, so I would talk about the 3 groups specifically that are most likely to give you conditions as part of this circulation. Could we just move on to the next slide?
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, yeah. So the Community League, when you submit that information, it would get circulated to all parties. The Community League would receive an approval in principle letter confirming that they can proceed once conditions are met. You would share a copy of this letter with your sublicensee, as that will give them the information of the things that they may or may not need to do, and the sublicensee would comply with those conditions. Usually conditions would relate, as I said, to the development permit, building permit, or business license, and could be something like, a childcare service might require a development permit, and your building permit's probably in a good place since you're already likely approved as an occupancy, but they may need confirmation that your fire alarm is up to current standard. Or there might be something like a for-profit fitness studio, which could need a development permit and a business license. Of course, the business license may already exist with that sort of entity. I think there was a comment from a Paul earlier in terms of business licenses. You won't always need a business license for that for-profit entity because they may already have it. with these conditions, if there's any questions, concerns, that kind of thing, you can contact us at any time, that being development services, development permit, building permit, business license. And you can call 311, you can call us directly, email us, look at the website. I believe that information is going to be provided to you after this meeting, or already has been, as the case may be. And my reminder there too would be that this letter that's being provided to you is sort of a written confirmation. It gives you something that you can hold on to and look at, but there's no reason that you can't reach out to us sooner during that process. Whenever it's appropriate for you to do so, and you have questions and ask them. These are services that are always there, and we can talk to you about them. And going from that, with any business license application process, the sub-licensee would include a floor plan. That floor plan could be the same as what you submitted with the letter. So you've got sort of a redundancy there that hopefully helps you out. Yeah, we would review that. The sub-licensee would work through everything, get their confirmations, provide that to you. And once all those conditions are met, you would enter into that sub-license. Shireen, is there anything that I missed there that you'd want specifically added?
No, the only thing that I realized I missed before passing on to you was just about the sub-license circulation process. So how, and the timelines on that. So with the circulation, that's really where we're trying to get to. Yes, I just again want to reiterate that. The circulation process internally takes about 2 weeks, and we're trying to really turn this around for leagues within 3 weeks. So that means that if your board meets to approve submitting the sub-license package and going forward, that hopefully by your next meeting, you're ready to go. Your sub-license has all been approved, and you might be working through some of those meeting conditions that Paul was just talking about, but it should be fairly ready to go. So yeah, so once it's circulated, we create that approval in principle letter, and then you can proceed. So if there are no conditions, you will move right down to Part D, which we'll go on to right away. But if there are those conditions, normally it will be up to the sub-licensee to meet them, because any of the licensing requirements or building issues will probably be something that you'll want the sub-licensee to deal with. It might be, of course, something that you work together with your sub-licensee, but I just again want to stress that. And again, community leagues do not require business licenses normally, and so again, all of those pieces would be passed on to the sub-licensee. Okay, so again, important here to stress, so that it is important for the community league board to ensure that all conditions are met. It's the league's responsibility. So even though the sub-licensee might be the one required to actually obtain the necessary permits, licenses, it's still the league's responsibility, because ultimately you're responsible for the building and the site. So all of the conditions would be approved, but you probably will ask your sub-licensee to show that to you. So for example, if the sub-licensee did need to go out and get a new business license, once they receive that, it would be good practice for you to have a copy, or to at least know the number, so that you know that's all in place. The league will then also, once all conditions have been met, you can actually enter into the agreement, which means to sign the agreement. So both parties can sign it. I've been asked right now whether it's okay for digital signatures, or signatures to happen by email. If your league board is okay with that, then we're okay with that. You just need to make sure that your board is willing to accept a contract being signed that way. Of course, you'll want to make sure that your board has a copy, and the sub-licensee has a copy of that agreement. And then once the agreement is signed, you'll email a final copy of the signed document, again, to that email address, community CL sublicense at edmonton.ca, and you'll CC in your NRC. And that will help us to file everything and have it all in one place, which also helps because we know that sometimes there's transitions within leagues and changes of volunteers. And so if, for example, you ever lose track of some of your documents, we will also have a repository of that. And just a note here too, that the final sublicense agreement will also be sent to assessment, finance and corporate services, also known as taxation, to determine if there are any property tax implications for the third party sublicensee. And again, community leagues are property tax exempt, and that will continue to be the case, provided the league continues to operate as a league normally would. But because the third party may be doing something that is not tax exempt, that will also be looked into. And so again, any league in good standing is going to continue to be tax exempt. So that really shouldn't be anything to worry about. As I said earlier, all final sublicense agreements may also be subject to random review, just to ensure that they meet conditions of the tripartite and city requirements. So basically, that's the end of the process. So hopefully that's fairly simple, but just as a recap, the league will contact their NRC, and the NRC will support the league to complete the sublicense package. The league will send that sublicense package to neighborhood services through the clsublicense@edmonton.ca email address, and neighborhood services will review it and do that circulation. That circulation and then agreement approval and principal letter could take up to 3 weeks, and we'll send that to the league with any conditions that must be met. It's advisable that the league shares a copy of that letter with the sublicensee, and that they then act to ensure those conditions are met. The league is responsible for receiving any of those proof that those conditions are met, and then once they are, they can sign into the agreement. They share back a final copy of that agreement with us, and that really will help us have a great understanding and a clear picture, as I said earlier, of the wide variety of recreation uses and programming occurring in neighborhoods across the city. It'll also help us to really be better able to tell the story of the value of leagues and the different types of relationships that you have with a variety of partners to deliver programs and services. So we're really excited actually to start to collect that. I think it'll really be a positive thing as we continue to work together going forward on this. So really that's the end of our presentation. So I'm going to now turn over, I said about 40 minutes, that's about right. Now we're going to go back to questions. So Laura, if maybe, and Kim, if you can help me scroll back to any questions that we may have had in the chat. I know they were popping in as I was presenting there. We can go back and do those. And then if we have also questions, people want to raise their hands or continue to put them into chat, that's great as well.
Yeah, thanks, Shireen. Thanks for that presentation. And I think, there's been one that's come up just at the end here that I think we should sort of focus on, because I think it is a crux. And thanks, folks. I recognize that this is a new process and it can feel a little bit daunting. And so that's, again, why we want to, create as many sort of forms and templates to make this sort of easy as possible for leagues to just fill out. So the question, Shireen, that came up at the end here was just around, when you have a sublicensee, so you have a renter that wants to do, let's say, the weekly religious group, right? So they want it every Sunday morning for a year. They're a nonprofit organization. How would the league go forward with the sublicense process? What does that look like, Shireen?
Okay, so sublicense process for what we've considered to be spiritual recreation is one that would require city approval. So a sublicense package would need to be required. So again, on the tip sheet, you'll notice at the bottom, I'm just going to bring that up now. In fact, I can share that page. That might be good for me to do. Bear with me. I'm going to just try and share this page now.
Do you want me to do that, Shireen?
No, I think I got it.
You've got it?
I think I got it. All right, so everybody can see this tip sheet. It looks like this at the top, and it's what is a sublicense? And it has some great questions there and answers. Then at the very bottom, it has the sublicense templates, and we will, as I said earlier, keep adding to this as we create new. So proceed using template. So those are the ones that you can proceed using the template, and they do not require you to send the sublicense package into the city in advance. unless they are with a for-profit entity. So all sublicenses with for-profit groups require city approval. On this, the right side of the sheet here, you can see submit sublicense package requires city approval in advance, and that spiritual recreation is on there. And so that would be one that would require. So yes, a church group, a faith organization, a religious group who is wanting to have their regular worship sessions each week would require to send that through for the approval process.
Yeah, and I apologize, folks. I put the wrong information in the chat because
That's okay. We're all learning.
If it's a sport group, right, or a uniformed group, so uniformed group, Shireen, would be. Can you give examples?
Brownies, Scouts, Air
Right.
Cadets, anything of that ilk. The other ones that we're going to be creating that will be proceed using template are support groups. So things like Alcoholics Anonymous, other types of groups. I know weight loss groups came up last time, provided they're not for profit. There was also the Royal Astronomical Society came up for the last session as well. That would be another type of support group potentially. And then there's also the arts and crafts type regular groups. So you may have like a Potter's Guild or a regular Monday night paint session. That would also go onto the proceed with using template side. We're just in the process of constructing those.
Using template means it does not need to go through the city. It's just, we community leagues, you have the templates, use the templates. And again, the templates are, we've learned through this process that leagues have had rental agreements in place that really were actually starting to cause harm to the organization. And so the sublicense template is really to ensure, I think Shireen mentioned this, that there's sort of a clear agreement on both sides as to who's responsible for what, who is responsible for liability, who's responsible for insurance. All those things are laid out in the tip sheet. We just don't want leagues to be put into vulnerable positions, especially now. We want things to go smoothly. So the spiritual recreation, the religious groups is definitely, is complicated, and I can appreciate that it's a little bit confusing, and that has to do with the zoning bylaw. Am I correct in saying that, Paul, currently, that this is a bylaw requirement?
Yeah, absolutely. So religious assembly is different than what is currently approved at a typical site, which would be like a community recreation service would be the zoning bylaw name for a community league. And religious assembly would be a church, mosque, religious group of some circumstance. What I'm seeing in the zoning bylaw renewal is that those types of uses are being amalgamated to some extent. We're still limited by the current zoning bylaw, and we have to review a development permit for religious groups or different types of activities that might want to happen there. But when that zoning bylaw is sort of released to community leagues and EFCL, I really encourage everyone to go through that, have a look at what your concerns might be, raise that to the planners who are doing it, and if there's still concerns or you in fact have support for it, talk to council about that when they're going to be making decisions on that renewal.
Paul, there was a question that Les had brought up just around, and I think it's a great one, right? So sometimes if leagues have relationships with religious organizations in the community, which we want to encourage as much as possible, and that religious group wants to hold like a youth rec night Friday nights, they want to have a space for kids to come together. How does that qualify? Is that considered a religious gathering, or is that the sport activity side of things?
I think it would be context dependent, and that's why you would go through that review process. So that would go to a development officer, and they would have a look at the specifics of what's happening and determine sort of where that fits in the permitting process. Could be that it's fairly limited in scope. Could be almost a program of the league itself might not need a development permit, or the circumstances of it may need it. I think we'd want to look at that specifically, rather than saying definitively you always need a DP. But at least we've had that conversation and we can work together on it.
Yeah. And I just, I want to address, so there's a few other questions in here, and then someone has asked specifically to ask a couple questions. So in terms of music, so concert series, folk clubs, again, anything that's a nonprofit that doesn't fall within those categories. So again, I believe, hey, Shireen, music would fall in sort of an activity use template. Or
Well,
is that a tough one?
I guess the thing is, a lot of those end up being delivered as programs of the league. So if it's a program of the league and you're contracting or hiring a singer to come in and do that, then that is not a sublicense. That is your program that you're running. So I've seen, like I know at Avonmore, for example, they've run a concert series, but that's been as a program of the league. If you're hiring like a concert promoter to come and do that, that would be a sublicense, yes. And chances are that that type of service, I'm going to say it might lean more towards a for-profit. And then, of course, any for-profit must be reviewed through this process. If it's a not-for-profit, then again, right now we don't have a template for that. You'd use the general template. So again, that general template would require to go through the approval process.
And so something like Kids on Track, I see Debbie had said. So Kids on Track is a physical activity after school program, is my understanding. So where would that sit, Shireen?
So that would be sport or physical activity. And that would be, they would use the template that we've provided there. Under, bear with me, I just got to bring that site up again. I would call that sport or activity use. And so that would be proceed using the template.
Great. Now I see that Linda had said.
Yes. So
had a couple questions. Linda, yeah, go ahead.
I do. I have a couple questions. So we have 4 groups that come in on Saturdays, and they haven't been in person because of COVID. But I'm gathering they'll be coming back next year. They're all they're cultural, so they only gather. It's a social gathering. They have food. It's more just there's no spiritual or any religious base. It's strictly cultural groups, and they're not profit. So that would be the template that doesn't need to be approved.
Well, I think that's probably going to come under arts and crafts or arts and cultural,
Okay.
which we will be developing soon. Right now, we don't have that.
Okay.
So it would be using the general template. However, watch the space. We're probably going to have that in place very soon. Yeah, that could also be considered as a type of support group because those people come together in a supportive community way.
But it would be it wouldn't need approval. Is that correct? That's what I'm trying to clarify.
Well, right now it would, because we don't have that template created. You would need to use the general template. So it would require a sublicense package. But I'll be talking with the EFCL next week, hopefully, to find out on the time scale for getting those other templates ready.
Okay, and then sorry.
Go ahead, Linda.
I just had one other question.
Sure.
So I have a group that comes in, they're in family future. So they run a program. So they're not for profit as well, but they run, with kids. What would that fall under? They meet once a week, or I should say.
I would say that would be sport or activity use. It's the activity side of that. And yeah, so you could use the sport or activity use template for that one.
Okay, and then I just wanted to comment, like, I know this tripartite agreement, like, I mean, these cultural groups have been in our hall for over 2 years, maybe going 3 years now. Never an issue. Now we come to the sub-licensing, and I know other people have commented, it's a lot of work, for us. I know it's an initial thing, but never a problem, right? Had any issues with them. They've come in, long term, and now, it's kind of complicated by having to do this agreement. And I just don't, I guess I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around, like, why, is it a control thing? Is it, is it the city and everything, wanting to know exactly all these community halls. Like I guess I'm just not clear on that. Because it is a lot of work.
Yeah, and so I said one of the things that I should have mentioned in terms of the term of this, if you think that you're going to have a really long-standing relationship, and I know, like we mentioned earlier, Brownies and Scouts and those sorts of groups have been in place in halls for probably 20, 30 years or more. Those type of agreements, you can actually create the sublicense for the full 10 years of the agreement. It can't go extend outside of the 10 years of the tripartite, but it could be for those full 10 years. And I know that some leagues are like, oh, well, that feels like too long, but within the templates, there are clauses, and it's basically a 30-day requirement to break that for either party. So again, I hope that by knowing you can set up very long-term agreements, that will appease some of that. But going back to your questions about the why, it really does come down to liability and making sure that all parties are protected. So the tripartite, as you know, is with the EFCL, the city and the league. And really, it's that level of liability. I appreciate that in most instances, nothing happens and nothing hopefully will happen. But unfortunately, we do live in a very litigious age. And we know that unfortunately, sometimes things can happen that get out of control, both for the sublicensee and for the league. And so that's really why that's in place.
I sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah.
when you say liability, all of our private rentals, so anyone who pays, right? All of our private rentals have the third party liability and things. We've made that mandatory. So like I'm the hall manager and, you know, I'm really struggling because I've brought this to the board's attention a couple times now. And I said, you know, this is happening and we need to get on top of this. You know, January 1st is coming and I'm spending you know, a lot of time trying to get as much information so I can present it to them. And our board, we have a very small board and there's a lot of changes and, you know, we have, you know, new and people come and go. And, you know, so as far as the liability side, is that what you're talking about? Are you talking about the third party liability insurance? When you say liability, is that what you're referring to?
Well, not just the liability, but all sections of the agreement. So for example, around the maintenance, who is responsible for that? Really what the sublicense process does is try to set out a really clear understanding of who is responsible for what. Whereas a rental agreement is normally just for that one-off event. It might say that, you know, this group cannot do this, cannot do that. But the sublicense, because it's that longer term, of duration, it is important that you have really clear relationship, and that's why we're trying to get this in place. The other thing that you mentioned as well that is important is, yes, we are moving to a better model of accountability with leagues and with the AFCL, and this tripartite has really attempting to do that. And part of that is, like I said earlier, telling the story of what leagues are really doing better. And so this process, by collecting this information, will help us to better demonstrate that.
And I think if I could just add to Shireen, the sublicense clause has always been in the tripartite. So in the previous tripartite, it was there. What was different was that there wasn't such clear parameters around when is a rental agreement no longer a rental agreement, but it's a relationship piece. And I remember as a president, I didn't want to go down the sublicense path. It felt like too much work. It felt like it was too onerous. But I really do truly believe, Linda, that, and I know it's more work now, and I want to help support that as much as we can. But I want to make sure that those relationships are clearly understood on both sides, because I do know that leagues are taken advantage of. I do know groups come in and don't sort of pull their weight, and that's not true for all groups. I absolutely appreciate that there's good relationships, but I think it's just around that transparency and that accountability. So, you know, Linda, there's no hard and fast deadline of January 1st. We want to make sure these are in place as soon as possible. We recognize that the boards have a lot on their plates right now. We're here to support the leagues as much as possible to get the information together. Les, I hear you. It would be nice if it could be as clear cut as that nonprofit for profit. Absolutely. I think we would all agree. It's just, unfortunately, this world is just a little bit more complex than that. And I hope that we can get there so that it's really clear for people all the time. But there's a little bit of muddiness. And again, that's why we're having these, and we can continue to have these so people can come together to ask those questions.
Yeah, and I do want to state too that this process really isn't intended to be onerous. I know it's new, and I know it feels like a lot more, but we really have tried, but with creating the templates to make it as easy as possible, putting together, you know, the sublicense package with the cover letter, the draft agreement, and getting your board's approval. You still would have had to put together the draft agreement of some sort to have a third-party sublicensee. The difference is now the cover letter, and then of course making sure you're getting that board approval, which I'm sure most leagues already were doing anyway, in terms of like good governance and making sure that any agreements were approved by the board. So we really do want to continue to streamline this, make it easier, add more templates all the time that do not require that sublicense package to be sent through. But we really have to stress it's important that leagues don't try and find ways to, subvert this process. We really feel that it's important because it is really about also protecting leagues, and also making sure that sublicensees understand their responsibilities too.
I saw Debbie had a question. Go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, if we are unsure if we need templates for our certain groups in the hall and our NRC is not sure, can we email Shireen directly or something and ask?
Sure. Yep, you can use, I received the CL sublicense email. You can CC in your NRC though, because it's great too. But normally what happens is NRCs reach out to me right away with your questions. So you can reach out to me, but ideally go through your NRC because they need to learn the process too, as we all learn this together. So yeah. But if you do email the CL sublicense, we will answer questions through there as well.
And I think, I do want to address, there was a comment in the chat, and Bill, I just want to address your concern around the Full Moon Folk Club as a nonprofit organization. I really think, I think it needs to be clear that I think the city isn't interested in approving in terms of what the league wants to do. It's more about ensuring that there's no sort of conflict with business licensing or those, that everything's in place. So if the league says, we want the Full Moon Folk Club to be here, excellent. The city doesn't care. That's great. As long as you've got the motion from the board, and it's really not about approving, and it's improving, ensuring that everything, the T's have been crossed and the I's have been dotted, right? And so that the agreement is signed, that everything fits within it. So if you wanted to ask any further questions, Bill, about your situation, happy to give you a few minutes.
Well, I think my point there is that here I'm sitting on this meeting today as the president of one community league, and I run another nonprofit called the Northern Lights Folk Club that rents from another community league. Both of these positions are volunteer. We don't have a huge board. We have a hard time finding volunteers for both of those organizations, and yet here we are sitting under the guise of making things more streamlined and more accountable, but we're actually adding more and more and more. And every time, I mean, I can't tell you how many meetings that I go to in the run of a week these days, and each one of those meetings is me taking on more, or me having to find another volunteer to take on more, and this at a time when volunteers they're just not forthcoming. And here with the Northern Lights Folk Club situation, we've been running for 25 years. We have made thousands and thousands of dollars of improvements in the community hall that we rent. And now, not only am I as a community league and the lady that I deal with at the other community league that I rent from, now everybody has to jump through all these extra hoops just to make sure, we're meeting somebody's concept of what falls into what. And it was proven today by when I first asked the question. Shireen, obviously you had no understanding at all of what the folk club was all about, because your answer to the initial thing was just, and that's not a criticism of you. That's just saying, if you don't know, then you're going to obviously start asking more questions, and one question begets another question, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just seems that we're making in the supposed interest of making things simpler and more streamlined, we're making things more complicated.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And these are, I mean, these are complicated questions, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of nuance to it. And so I would encourage everyone to connect with their NRCs primarily. The NRCs, as Shireen mentioned, go up to Shireen, you know, with their questions or their things. So, I mean, we've shared Shireen's email address because she's willing, obviously, if there's anything that you're not getting answers to, that we want to help. You know, and Bill, we hear that absolutely. And I think that's why we really want these agreements, if we can, to be put in place for the longest term as possible, so that they can not only have good relationships with leagues, we know those exist already. So, and let's just try to alleviate some of that work. So please feel free, you know, Bill, if there's any other support that the league needs, feel free to, I'll put my email in here as well. Feel free to reach out and we can see what we can do.
Yeah, and I think, Bill, it's really great to hear that from both the perspective of the league and from the sub-licensee. We do need that feedback, and so criticism or not, I think just know it's very much welcome, because that's how we will make this a better process. In terms of the future as well, what we would hope to do in the future is offer these types of sessions for sub-licensees as well, or at least have more resources and information available, especially for those not-for-profits, because even under the funding policy for leagues through your operating grant, one of those reasons that was created was to allow for space for multicultural and not-for-profit groups to have space within leagues, really maximizing the vibrancy and use of those spaces. So that's really important to us. Please understand that. And, you know, again, we are really committed to trying to get this as good as possible. The onus will be on the league to really work through this process involving the sub-licensee as they need to be. But again, seek those longer term agreements where possible, because it will be set it up once and then it's good for 10 years potentially, unless either party wants to change things, of course. Hey, I just want to go back. I did see a question here around the time scale from Linda around, do all sub-license agreements need to be completed by January 1st? So if you have any programming that will be continuing from January 1st or starting from January 1st, then yes, you'll need them in place for that date. You can get those going now. We can approve them in advance for January 1st. That's not a problem. If they don't require approval and through the sub-license package process, you can also get those completed between your third parties now, so that they just come into force on January 1st. COVID has also changed this a little bit. We know that leagues aren't doing the same programming that they obviously would be doing, nor are they likely to maybe have as firm start and end dates right now. But we do know that some things are continuing. Things like childcare, for example. If you have a current childcare using your space that isn't a program of your league, you would want to make sure that you have an agreement in place from January 1st. So that's just one example. The other thing that I noticed in here is that, again, acknowledging that this will take some work in advance, but hopefully over time will become a little bit easier, especially if you're able to set up those longer term agreements. Confirming the 3 weeks, yes, we're actually hoping it will be under 3 weeks. That the circulation process could take up to 2 weeks, but ideally it will actually take between 2 to 3 weeks. The only thing to say is that if it's a really complex sub-license recreation use that we haven't contemplated yet, when we then send that to development services, there may be more questions that are asked. And so it might take a little bit longer toing and froing as we learn through that. One of the things, though, that might be possible is to start a rental agreement, because you have up to those 30 days to get that going while we work through those issues. So again, we are aware, and we heard this at the last session, well, what if we have this great opportunity and they want to start like next week? How do we make that happen? Well, if the league is comfortable, they can start that rental agreement and then submit their package. And then hopefully during that rental agreement period, we'll get the sublicense in place. And again, if things are in progress or a process, are we going to say, oh, you have to stop because we haven't finally sent you that conditions and that approval with conditions letter? No, you will continue, and we will continue to work through that process with you.
Can I just add to that, Shireen? Sorry.
Mhm.
Just to reiterate, so there's that letter that comes out is writing, and that's your sort of evidence, and that's the thing that you can hold on to. But again, there's no reason that you, if there are questions for development services or others, reach out to us at any time. Like I said, 311 email, phone, websites. We have the resources there for you, and it's open to everybody in the public. And please do so. So you can get those sort of answers and be prepared for them well in advance of that. But you get that sort of written document at the end, which is the good thing for you in your records. And that's it.
So Les, Les, I just wanted to say, yes, you're correct. This is the only time where this crossover is a pain because the current tripartite is ending in December and then restarting. Any sublicenses that go over that term would need to end and then begin again in January. So that's going to happen every 10 years, unfortunately, but that's just the nature of one contract ending and another beginning. So.
Sorry, I just have a question, and Shireen, you probably can answer this. So the four groups that are, well, they're physically not in our hall now. They haven't been in person since March of 2020 because of COVID.
Yeah.
So would the sub licensing have to still be done even though they're not physically using our hall? Like, I'm not sure when they're coming back. I'm in
No.
them on a regular basis. And we didn't, so I'm just.
Yeah. So the answer to that is no. This is very much based on the land use and on being based on the site. So you could get one in place that then if they think they might come back in March or something like that, you could still start it and it would still be relevant for that term. But I don't know if you're you probably aren't charging them rent or anything during that duration, but you could write that in, that until they're based on site, they won't be paying or something like that to that effect.
Yes, thanks for bringing that up. So what we did, they have credits with us. They didn't want monies returned or anything like that. So basically they had paid for the year and because they, so technically, technically they haven't, nothing's come off their account, right? Because they haven't been in. And then if they came in for this is a additional question. So like one of the groups might have a Christmas gathering at one time. So with that, because it's December, it's not applicable, right? Because it's still before January 1st. So we don't have to worry about that. It would just come off their credit.
Yeah. There's two ways of dealing with that. You could have a one-off rental for them. For that event, and then you would obviously manage the finances however your league would normally do that, or if within your sublicense you allow them a certain number of additional events per year. So for example, I worked with a league with a beach volleyball sublicensee, and they have regular weekly usage, and then they also have additional tournaments or events, and so they wrote into that they will have these additional events per year. They might not know exactly when they're going to be, but they obviously have a process of negotiating that in. So that would be just something that then you'd want to make sure that your board were aware of when they were coming in. But yeah, like a separate rental for something like that, because it's a one-off event, that's fine too.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. Are there any other questions?
Trying to think, there was
if we haven't addressed something in the chat, please feel free to raise your hand. I did see one about if they are helping to improve the building, could they be a program of the league? So that was something that Paul, actually, you had written. So again, important to understand the actual tripartite license as well. So it's really important here that the league understands that they are responsible for any maintenance or construction or any projects on this licensed site. It might be that your sub-licensee wants to make some changes to your building or to the site to benefit them, but those need to go through the league. For example, it could also be that the sub-licensee is going to put some money towards that. Nonetheless, the league would still be the applicant. And this is where the tripartite license and the park and facility development process start to overlap. So again, that's why it's really important that you keep in touch with your NRC, because if there's any changes that need to be made physically on the site, you would need to put forward a park and facility development project proposal, and then check if anything needed to be done by that. But if it's something like painting or hanging pictures, things like that, that a sub-licensee might want to do, those are good. But again, we recommend that the sub-licensee let the league know and that the league approve that, because ultimately it's your building and your responsibility. You want to make sure that it's been done well and to your liking.
Yeah, and Alana has raised around the 30% piece.
Okay.
Which is always complex and complicated. Someone had asked earlier, and I had put a link to the copter in the chat, Shireen. So what's the messaging that we're giving to leagues? I just want to make sure.
I think the best thing to do, Kim, I don't know if you can find it, but the advice that had been provided by EFCL's lawyers, insurers about the copter requirements would be good to be put into here. Yeah, at one time you were told that it'd be 30%. What's been determined is that's too simplistic a way to define what is taxable and what isn't. Again, if the league is continuing to deliver as a league, there will continue to be no tax issues. If the sub-licensee is a taxable entity and the use is taxable, then that's why when we send the sub-license to our taxation team, they'll have a look at that. And they would normally contact the sub-licensee directly. Now, as I said earlier, they might reach out to the league, but that is only because that's who's registered for that site. You would then make sure that the sub-licensee passed that on. The league passed that on to the sub-licensee. So hopefully that it doesn't clarify it. Yeah, at one time we were told, I would say disregard that. If you have any specific questions about what that use is, because it isn't even as easy as, well, you can only have 30% commercial use. 30% of what? Is it total hours in a day, 24 hours? Is it operating hours? It gets very, very context specific very quickly. So it's better just to ensure that it's recreation use and that you follow any process that needs to be followed. That will help to ensure that you are not in any difficulties with relation to taxation exemption. And I do think that both AFCL and the city are committed to continuing to understand this process and to make it clearer as we continue to learn more about the types of use. To be honest, this really didn't come up until very recently with the commercial use aspect. And so we are very much learning. At the moment, we've only received one type of commercial use within community leagues that we know about, and that is for childcare, which again is still then regulated by the province, is a fairly straightforward process. It's the other types of use that are going to be very new to us. So again, please have some patience as we work through to understand that. But again, the recreation use piece is the key there. Thanks, Kim, for sharing that. Okay, so I personally see very little process value in the process specific to how the process will help protect the league or benefit us in any way. And again, I would encourage you to reach out to your lawyer or to Foster Park, your insurer as well, to discuss that from the liability perspective. But basically, in terms of good governance, having very clear legal agreements when you are renting. So your rental agreements should also be quite a robust document. And also then the sublicense agreements being a very thorough document will help to protect the league. The tripartite, as Laura said, has always required actually that sublicenses are approved by the city. What happened previously is that there was this other type of use, long-term rental, that wasn't actually considered as part of the tripartite. And so now what we're doing, because we've had this opportunity to renew and understand the agreement more, making sure that only those types of agreements contemplated in the tripartite are now going forward. So we have rentals and we have sublicenses. Those are the only types of agreements. And in doing so, we've really just tried to make sure that either a rental agreement is in place or a sublicense is in place. The sublicense process, as we said, needs to be approved by the city. But we realized very early in that process that we could not approve every single sublicense out there, nor would that make sense to leagues or be fair. So what we wanted to do is create these templates that are easy to use. Hopefully you can pick them off the shelf and create them, but then also ensure that they comply with all the requirements of the tripartite, which you have to be in good standing with as a league, and then also have those levels of liability built in. So you'll see there's clauses for insurance and liability that are very clear, and EFCL have done their due diligence in liaising with the insurer about that. And then also just lay out very clearly the responsibilities of both the league and the third party. So that's really where we want to make sure that it's just as clear as possible, and that those agreements are as strong and supportive of the programming, but also protecting for the league and the sublicensee.
Yeah, and I think, Sharina, I think, when I look at the general template, I mean, it really just looks like a rental agreement. It's just a more formal rental agreement. The problem is leagues, and I don't need to tell you this, you know that people change over, right? And so by having these documents in place, there allows for some continuity of information, right? So it sort of identifies, if we have a conflict, how are we going to resolve that conflict? Right now, I'm not sure if your rental agreements identify that, but in the sublicense it says, no, this is the process that we're going to use if we have a conflict. And the issue is, folks, and I need to be honest, I mean, there's 162 leagues and as many disputes as you can imagine, right? And so I recognize that most of you have excellent agreements and excellent relationships. The problem is sometimes this does go very sideways. We have leagues that have had organizations actually move in, reorganize their kitchens, build things, take things out. I mean, it is remarkable, the situations that we find ourselves in. And so I hate to always use that sort of example, but it's sometimes those bad apples that cause us all to have to do these things. This is really not a complicated template. It really is just, and I can't imagine any organization that you're working with is going to be reluctant to sign this, because it just outlines, it actually protects them too, and it protects you, right? It really provides that clarification. And so again, recognizing it, the board needs to make a motion. And again, I think Shireen's identified this. It's really is good governance. I get it's an extra motion that has to go on the agenda. It's a little bit more forward planning. We're here to support you. January 1st is when we want these things in place. We know there's lots going on, so just talk to us, right? It's not, there's no big hammer that's going to come down on you. It's really just about helping you to move this forward. So again, we'll make sure that there's as many templates as possible. So we'll work on that arts and crafts template for those groups that are really more inclined for just gathering and having that recreation in that format. And again, this is really how do we get to yes? We're not trying to put up barriers to no's. We really want leagues to use those spaces. And again, this doesn't apply to programming, right? So if leagues, feel free to continue your programming as per usual. This is really just that rental piece of it. So I hope that's clear too.
Okay. If there aren't any other questions, then again, you can reach me at either the Shireen.Mears or the CL sublicense at edmonton.ca email address. Please, as I said, CC in your NRC. But again, to reiterate what Paul said a number of times, even before this process started, if you have any questions about business licensing, anything from a development services perspective about the building, reach out in advance as well. We don't have to wait until the sublicense package comes in and it's circulated. Even encourage your potential sublicensee to reach out to them. The more advanced questions and answers that we have, the more likely this will be as quick as possible. So yeah, we're here to help and really committed to working with you through this. It will, and thank you, Ilana. It will get clearer to understand. It is daunting. I appreciate that, and I'm really, as I said, committed to making this as good as it can be. But it will take some time, and we need your support, and we need to work through some of these sublicenses to learn as well. So I look forward to doing that.
Can I ask a quick question, Shireen?
Sure, Paul.
Just from my knowledge of your inbox, is the CL sublicense maybe cleaner and better for leagues to respond to, because your personal probably gets bombarded with a number of different things, and they
Yeah,
might
I do try and prioritize the sublicense stuff. So yeah, I think the sublicense, the CL sublicense at edmonton.ca is great, because then I know it's definitely a sublicense issue. You're not contacting me about something else, but I will be responsive to either.
Can you just pop that in the chat, Shireen, so we've got
I
it?
sure will.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any last questions, folks? Again, appreciate you taking your Saturday for this conversation. It's not the way all of us want to start our Saturdays, but I know it's important, and I really value you all taking the time to sit here and learn. So again, so this video, this has been recorded, obviously, so it will be posted. Kim, what do we think? Can we put it on that same web page that we've been linking to everyone to? Okay, great.
Yeah.
And hopefully, early next week at the latest, so that if you do need to forward it on to board members for them to watch or what have you. Shireen, there was a question earlier about the slideshow specifically. Is that something that we could also add?
Yeah, so I just want to clean up that one page that had that mistake on it, and then I will I'll make sure that we get that sent to Kim, and she can get that on there as well for you. The other thing, I should say that Paul and I would do this session again. We did 2. If we need to do another one in the new year, to either like recover or review, or somebody else from your group or your board want to attend, then please let us know, and we will absolutely try and fit that into the calendar. So yeah, and watch the space for hopefully more information to come out and more templates to come out.
Yeah, Shireen, I think these are helpful. I think this is where we're going to get the questions. I think if we can even try to do one in January, I think that would be great. So
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. Take care. Keep warm out there. Here it's windy. So
yes, what's this snow business? My goodness. Okay. Take care, everyone. Hope you have a great day.
have a
Stay
good
safe.
day. All the best. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye. Take care.